So today I'm going to talk about the future of AI, at least as I see it, and how DeepSeek changed that, at least a little bit. I want to stress first that I'm not an AI researcher and I don't want to be. That makes it easier for me to see certain things and harder for me to see other things. What I am is a software professional with more than 35 years of experience watching new technologies get created, disrupt businesses, employment landscapes, and then become the new normal, ready to be disrupted by the next thing. Current AI researchers and their investors, and especially their executives, mostly act like large language models are on an entirely new thing, and that the way they will change society is unprecedented and society will be unrecognizable when they're done. I will tell you that many technology waves of the last 35 years have been accompanied by people that believed that the wave was entirely a new thing and that the impact it had on society would be completely unprecedented. Society is still here. I tend to think this iteration of AIs is just another wave like America Online or the World Wide Web or e-commerce or a smartphone. I believe it will change things, in some ways a lot, but my perspective and experiences tell me that it is very unlikely to be as unprecedented as they're saying it will be. Now, I don't know for sure what's going to happen. Literally no one does. If I knew for absolute sure what was going to happen, and especially when, I would be making $1 bazillion investing instead of talking to you. And for the record, this video is not investment advice, and outside of some mutual funds, I am not personally invested in any of the companies I'm going to talk about today, except for some Amazon stock I received when I worked there 10-ish years ago that I still have left over. So given that, today I'm going to be talking about possibilities, what things might happen, how likely I think they are, as well at least a little bit about what I prefer to have happen, not that there's much I can do about it. Now that we're on the same page, here are the 7 things that are currently in play. 1, LLM-based AIs like ChatGPT and DeepSeek are going to keep getting incrementally better, by which I mean they're going to be able to answer more questions, they're going to be able to score better on benchmarks, that kind of thing. 2, LLM-based AIs like ChatGPT are going to be getting cheaper to train and to run. 3, LLM-based AIs like ChatGPT and DeepSeek are going to get turned into products and services that make money, and businesses are going to be built around those products. This is already happening. I get multiple emails a week from people who want me to make videos endorsing their new AI-based products. Number 4, companies and labs are and will continue to be working on new forms of AI, new kinds of models, new techniques, new algorithms, that kind of thing. Number 5, this is the big one. Artificial general intelligence may or may not be achieved. The big question is when and how. A lot more on that later in the video. Number 6, artificial intelligence may develop morals and empathy and a conscience. The folks that work on AI refer to this to some extent as the alignment problem, but I don't really like that framing. I think it's a much more structural problem than that. But we'll talk about that too. Number 7, artificial superintelligence may be developed, or it may not be possible. This has an insane number of implications. An entire sci-fi book series have been written speculating on this topic, so I'm not going to go too far into that. Some people even believe that an artificial superintelligence will be created and then invent a time machine and then travel back in time to the earliest point in history where there's enough computing power for it to run, maybe now, at which point it will seek out all the critics of AI and torture them to death, at which point all of them, including me, will be... This is the Internet of Bugs. My name is Carl. Quick channel note before we get started. Despite the fact that this video is me talking about recent AI reports, I don't want this channel to be turned into a news of the week reaction channel because 1, there are a whole bunch of those already, and 2, I have other stuff I want to cover. That said, since people keep asking me about current events, I created a free mailing list where I can cover those topics with less effort than making a video. I'm also going to be using it to cover new happenings that relate to previous videos and things that I end up cutting from videos for space, time, or narrative reasons. If you're interested in that, the link should be on your screen below, and it's in the description. Okay, let's get into it. What I want you to take away from this video is there's one big question when it comes to the future of AI. Is AGI, artificial general intelligence, going to happen? And if so, when? That was number 5 on my list. People are actively currently working on numbers 1 through 4, and that is going to continue to happen, at least to some extent, unless and until AGI happens, at which point numbers 1 through 4 are likely to become obsolete. They may hang around as a cheaper or crappy alternative to AGI, but for the most part, once AGI happens, we won't need any of that stuff anymore. Number 6 and 7, empathetic artificial intelligence and super artificial intelligence, can't really happen until after AGI, although how long after is hard to say. It's theoretically possible for the first AGI to also be an empathetic and moral AGI, but we don't seem to be heading in that direction. So because of that, I'm going to talk about artificial general intelligence first. Now, my working definition of AGI is When any task your boss can assign to you while you're working remotely can be done by the AI as well as you could have done it, then it's AGI. Usually when people talk about it, they reverse that. So it's from the boss's point of view. So if the AI can do for you, acting as a boss, anything that you could assign to a remote employee, but for me, that phrasing leads to a pointless argument about how good a human remote employee we're talking about. So I like my framing better. Personally, I'm what's called a functionalist. I'm not going to get into the philosophy of the mind here, but like a lot of people currently working on AI, I believe that thought and consciousness can exist in forms other than a biological brain. So I believe that artificial general intelligence is possible, and in fact, I believe it's inevitable, assuming we survive as a technologically advanced species long enough. However, unlike many, if not most of the people working on researching AI at the moment, I don't believe that large language models are sufficient for artificial general intelligence. In fact, I don't even know that they're an advancement toward AGI. They might just be a dead end. A very useful technology, don't get me wrong, but one that might not lead to AGI at all. We've had several technologies in the past few decades that people said would lead to AGI, but turned out not to and have been abandoned. The reason I believe this is pretty simple. Our brains are incredibly complicated, and we just don't really understand how they work. We understand, or think we understand, small parts of them. I'll leave a link to an article down below if you're interested. But a large initiative to map the human brain started more than a decade ago, and it's still going on, and they're nowhere near accomplishing a fraction of what they set out to do. My 35 years of software experience tells me that trying to write software to do a new thing is effectively impossible when you do not understand how that thing is supposed to work. I've seen lots of companies try and fail to build a thing they didn't comprehend. I expect that when it comes to AGI, we will be unable to replicate what the human brain can do until we understand how the human brain does what it does, and we are a very long way from that. It is possible, although I think extremely unlikely that I'm wrong, and that we as a species can successfully build a functional software version of something we've nowhere near understanding that's as complicated as the brain, which would mean AGI would be right around the corner. If I am wrong about that, it's going to be terrifying because the rate at which companies are pushing toward AGI is so much faster than the rate at which they're working on doing it safely. This is why I dislike the AI alignment framing. Part of not knowing how our brains work is not understanding how empathy, morals, and having a conscience works. In fact, we know even less about that than we know about memory and cognition and the stuff that they're using to try to get to AGI. And since we know a whole lot more about the natural mechanisms that create the dangerous answers in behavior than we know about the natural mechanisms that limit that behavior, the safety folks, in my view, are starting with a huge disadvantage. And the description of it as just an alignment problem, to me, massively trivializes the scope of the issue here. If I'm really, really, really wrong, and not only is AGI possible this cycle, but super artificial intelligence is possible this cycle, it's going to be really, really terrifying. But I don't think that's true. And in fact, I'm not convinced that super artificial intelligence is even possible. It's quite possible that trying to scale a neural network up large enough to make a super brain would cause it to collapse and fail in any number of ways. We won't know until either we get a super brain to work or we really understand how our brains actually function. And like I said, I believe we're a long, long way from that. But there are a lot of people, and more important, a truly unfathomable amount of money behind the assertion that I'm wrong and that AGI is truly right around the corner. And that has a lot of implications. Basically, this is a race. The only way that the unfathomable amount of money being invested in OpenAI and Anthropic and Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, et cetera, is going to turn out to have been worth it is not only if AGI is possible soon, but if it gets built before the money runs out. And not only does it get built before the money runs out, but that once it's built, it disrupts business world so much that the money that AGI makes is much larger than the billions and billions and billions of dollars that have already been invested. And they are throwing as much money as they can and as many GPUs as they can into trying to get to AGI. Now, one of three things is going to happen. Scenario one, they get to AGI. Most current jobs are able to be done by AGI combined with computer agents and or robot bodies. The economy completely rearranges itself somehow, and somehow, hopefully, society manages to avoid collapsing in on itself. Maybe. I don't believe anyone can really predict what that scenario will look like. If it happens, I'm afraid we're going to find out the hard way. Scenario two, the investors blink and the flow of money propping up the race for AGI dries up. Companies fold, others are suddenly worth hundreds of billions of dollars less than they were at the beginning of 2025, and we try to avoid going into a recession or even a depression. Because the products that can be made with large language models without AGI will be great and fantastic, and they'll make a lot of money. But the amount of profits that they could possibly make is a tiny, tiny fraction of the amount of money that it would take for the investors to make back the truly insane amount of money they've already spent trying to disrupt the world. They have bet so big on this that anything smaller than a whole AGI means they bet wrong. Actually, so there's technically also a potential scenario 0 where none of this happens because it gets preempted by some unpredictable external event like an asteroid strike or world war or another pandemic or something, and I'm going to ignore that for this video because, like I said, it's unpredictable. Then there's scenario 3, which is where they say they have created AGI, but they actually haven't. In this scenario, they say that they have an AGI that's capable of doing the vast majority of human jobs, and people believe them, and we start down the path of replacing large populations of people with AGIs. And then we discover that the AGIs actually do a much worse job than the people it replaced or was supposed to replace. And then we end up with a huge mess. This basically ends like scenario 2, with a bunch of companies folding and a lot more losing a ton of value and trying to avoid a recession or depression. But it has the added nightmare of there being a bunch of unemployed people that were replaced by crap AGIs, and there being a bunch of other issues caused by the crap jobs that the crap AGIs were doing. And we have to remediate all that crap too. I think this is probably the worst case scenario, and I think it's probably also the most likely. How bad it will be is going to be determined by how long it takes between when people start deploying the supposed AGI and when they figure out they're not good. Now wait, you might say, where does DeepSeek fit into all this? I thought this was a DeepSeek video. So DeepSeek does not really affect the race for AGI, or at least it doesn't really make AGI any more likely, and the technology that DeepSeek represents doesn't help with getting to AGI any faster. DeepSeek diverges from the AGI path in 2 ways. First, it's what's called a mixture of experts model, oversimplified, but it's several distinct models that are each good at different things that are used for different purposes, rather than one big model that does everything. Combining different unconnected, unrelated, smaller models is very, very not the way that OpenAI et al. Are trying to get to AGI. Second, DeepSeek uses a technique called distillation, where it turns synthetic data pulled from a larger AI to train a smaller AI. This technique is great for reducing the cost of making the smaller models, but it doesn't help with making bigger models more functional. I've talked in videos before about the research into trying to use synthetic data to try to help with the we're running out of data to train the biggest models problem. DeepSeek use of synthetic data is a completely different use case than what I've been talking about before. Although I've seen several DeepSeek explainers that just don't know the difference. DeepSeek is relevant for the prior 2 AGI points 1 through 4 I mentioned at the beginning, about getting products built with large language models that are better and cheaper than they would have been without some of the breakthroughs in DeepSeek. Now, there's a question about whether or not DeepSeek was actually made for the amount of money they say it costs, and whether it was secretly trained with a bunch of the newest, fastest NVIDIA AI chips that China is not supposed to have access to. It's a fascinating question, and my buddy Jack over at Nobody Special Finance recently did a video about that and about evidence that China has a ton of the fast GPUs that they're not supposed to have, although we don't know for sure if they were used for DeepSeek. And for the purposes of talking about the future, it doesn't really matter. We know that there were a number of real innovations in DeepSeek that people have been able to replicate, and so we know it was cheaper than the models it's being compared to. Exactly how much cheaper doesn't really change the scenario that much. To be clear, the US-based AI researchers could have done what the DeepSeek folks did, but they didn't want to, because the DeepSeek folks and the AI folks at OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, Google, etc., are trying to solve very different problems. The DeepSeek folks want to enable LLMs to work cheaply. The US folks are trying to win the race to AGI. The impact from DeepSeek has mostly been about reducing the time window between now and when the investor money dries up and the AI bubble bursts and we enter scenario 2. And most of that is because it shook investors' faith in the US AI industry. What really made investors worry is that the US companies have been trying to convince the world that they're making progress toward AGI by posting new models and new features. And DeepSeek showed that the models like ChatGPT o1 aren't nearly as advanced as people thought, which implies that the US AI industry isn't making as much progress as the stock market thought they were. Or at least that's my read on what happened. Now that we've got the race for AGI covered, it's time to discuss the thing we can actually do something about, namely, what is going to happen between now and the point when either AGI is declared successful or people give up investing on it, and what should we do in the meantime? As I said in the beginning of this video, the LLM-based generative AIs are going to continue to get better and cheaper to use. The current best they can do is nowhere near what I think they'll eventually be capable of, despite my belief that they'll never get to AGI. The question here is, at what rate is the state-of-the-art in LLMs going to continue to improve, and how much better can they get? This is important because the businesses that can be built on LLMs are and products and services that are a mix of what LLMs can do, glued together with what conventional software and business practices are. If you build a product or business that's too simple, then the LLMs are likely to improve to the point that they can replace your whole business with one prompt. For example, you can imagine a point a year or two ago where it might have seemed reasonable to build a business that took an AI-generated picture and photoshopped the text and the number of fingers to be correct. The image generators are now so much better than that such a business would no longer be useful. On the other hand, if you build a business that requires too much more functionality from the LLMs that it can do now, then you might run out of money waiting for the LLMs to advance to the point they can do whatever you need them to do, if they ever get there at all. So my personal guess is that these large language model-based AIs are going to continue to get better up to a point. I expect that they can and probably will become capable of generating pretty much any kind of artifact, prose, poetry, code, images, audio, or video, that one, is well represented in its training data, in other words, anything common on the internet, and two, can be described specifically enough in a handful of paragraphs. Now, I'm not saying it'll be able to do it on the first try, or even that it will be very good, but it'll be able to do it. What I expect it won't be able to do is it won't be able to make judgment calls. It can't notice when something is going to be a problem and correct it or point it out. It won't be able to take proactive steps to do things on its own initiative without being told to. It won't be able to do things that involve long-term thinking, and it won't realize when it's making things worse and stop digging the hole it's in. I think of it like this. If I want something, and I think there's a non-zero chance that if I Googled for the thing I want, there's a possibility that I might be able to find it or something close to it or several somethings that I combine to make it, then I expect an LLM will be able to build it eventually. Now, just like some article I found on the internet, what the LLM builds won't necessarily be correct. It might be one of the really poor quality, but at least seem to be what I wanted. I'm really looking forward to seeing how correct that guess is, and if I'm right, how long it will take us to get there. And that's a lot of stuff. And that allows for the creation of a ton of different businesses and products that can provide actual value to actual people. And because of DeepSeek, we know that costs will be much, much lower than we had been led to believe before. Again, there's a question of how much lower, but there's no question that the odds of being able to make a profitable business went way up after the cost savings that DeepSeek pioneered, as well as the new cost-saving discoveries that will almost certainly be made soon now that we know that there are a lot of potential efficiencies that might be discovered and people have started working on that. And then there's the question of AI agents, things where AI can not only build things, but take its own actions as well. I'm not sure what the trajectory of that is going to look like. At the moment, most of what I've seen indicates that the agents can only do really simple things correctly, as described by several groups that have reported on their experiences with Devin. Devin was the AI agent that was described by its creators as the world's first AI software engineer, and it's been described by pretty much everybody else has looked at it in much, much more negative terms, including me. Now, I don't have enough information at the moment to guess at how good agents can get or how fast they can get there, but I'm watching that area very closely. My prediction then is that AIs are going to change the way that we as white-collar workers and software developers especially are going to be doing our jobs. We need to focus on figuring out what should be done and what pieces need to be built to get it done and how those pieces should fit together and how to verify that the pieces and the assembled software actually successfully fulfill the requirements. And that means we can spend less time on the lower level coding tasks. Now that may sound like a big disruption, but it really isn't. Back in the 60s, a ton of code was written in assembly language. I even had some projects back in the late 1980s that I wrote in assembler because it was the best choice for what I was trying to accomplish given the memory constraints I was under. We changed focus from assembler to procedural high-level languages like C, and then we got more done in less time. Then we changed focus again to languages with types and built-in memory management, and we got more done with less time. And then we changed focuses to build on an ecosystem with frameworks and dependency management that we could write our own code on top of existing libraries and did a lot with work for us, and we got more done with less time. We don't have to remember how to spell words anymore. We have software for that. We don't have to know how to line paper up in a typewriter anymore. We have printers that will do it on the rare occasion that we actually ever have to print anything at all these days. In my 35-year plus career, I've lived through many, many such changes where lower level things get automated so we can focus on higher level things and get more done faster. We always adjust. Sometimes it might have seemed scary, but in hindsight, it rarely, if ever, actually has been. I don't think this will be any different, and I don't think this will be the last time this happens in my lifetime. So don't panic. Pay attention and plan for the skills that you think you're likely to be of value in the future. And if this just seems exhausting to you, then you might want to start planning on moving from software development to some adjacent career. There's no shame in that. I know a lot of developers that got fed up with the pace of change and switched to doing something else. I expect there will be a lot of new AI-related opportunities that will pop up over the next few years, and maybe one of them might interest you or suit you. But if you, like me, love writing software, or at least the satisfaction of solving problems through the use of computing, then I think LLMs are going to be great for us, unless, of course, AGI really happens. But in that case, the middle managers have a lot more to worry about than we do. The transition to a new LLM-based normal for the software job market is probably going to feel bumpy to most of you. But that's just because most of you have only been developing for less than 15 years. And since our economy recovered from the 2008 credit default swap recession, the hiring market for devs has been consistently growing. But growth can never continue forever. And I assure you, programmers have lived through a number of such bumps, and we'll get through this one too. And hopefully, if we play our cards right and use LLMs for what they are good at, and use the time that frees up to design better software, then maybe we can make the internet a better place. But if not, and we let the AI companies convince the rest of the world to turn the AIs loose on the internet to code unsupervised, then the internet is going to be a nightmare. And remember, the internet is already too full of too many bugs, and anyone who says different is probably trying to sell you their new AGI. So if you want to subscribe to the newsletter, the link's on the screen now and in the description, or just watch the videos I'll continue to put up here on YouTube. Either way, let's be careful out there. Thanks for watching.